Giraffe reached the windbreak line like it was checking the edge of a world. Slow steps, long neck angled forward, and a confidence that made the trees look smaller than they were. The windbreak wasn't wild forest. It was planted. 2 rows of acacia and hardy eucalyptus set along the boundary of Maji Plains Reserve to protect the research compound from dust storms. In the dry season, the wind carried grit that stung your eyes and coated everything in a fine brown film. The windbreak softened it. It also created a thin ribbon of shade and green in a landscape that spent most days sun-bleached and open. For animals, a ribbon of green meant one thing: browsing. But the reserve had a rule about the windbreak. It was a working line, not a feeding station. The trees were young enough that too much browsing could stunt them, and the compound depended on them. Rangers tried to keep large herbivores moving past, not settling. Most days, that rule held. Then the giraffe arrived. Kito Mwangi saw it from the observation tower just after sunrise. He was a field tech for the reserve: radio collars, waterhole cameras, vegetation plots. He wasn't a ranger, but he worked with them, and he knew the windbreak's importance because he'd spent 2 months planting replacement saplings after last year's storm snapped branches like toothpicks. The giraffe stood at the windbreak edge, taller than the trees on the near side, and it didn't look like it intended to move on quickly. It was a male, judging by the thicker ossicones and heavier neck. Its coat pattern was dark and sharp-edged, the kind that made it look almost painted. It stepped closer, hooves careful, and then it raised its head to browse. The leaves stayed high. Kito's eyes narrowed. That was the first thing that felt wrong. A giraffe browsing should have been effortless. Long neck, long tongue, leaves stripped from branches like a comb pulling through grass. But this giraffe wasn't eating. It stretched, tongue flicking out once, but the highest leafy branches were just beyond comfortable reach because the windbreak had been trimmed. The reserve had pruned the lower and mid-level growth on purpose. They'd raised the browse line so that antelope and smaller browsers couldn't strip the trees, and they'd shaped the canopy so it held together against wind. The result was a windbreak that stayed green up high and sparse below. It protected the compound. It also teased a giraffe. The giraffe took 1 step closer and angled its neck upward, lips tugging at the very top leaves. It managed to catch a small cluster and chew slowly, then reached again. Still, most leaves stayed high, out of easy reach, and Kito could see the giraffe's frustration in the way it adjusted, stepping, stretching, trying different angles like it was solving a puzzle. Below the trees, the ground was bare and dusty. Rangers had cleared brush along the windbreak base to reduce fire risk, leaving no low cover and no low branches. The windbreak was a tall wall of trunks and high foliage. Kito picked up his radio. "Base, this is Kito on tower," he said. "We've got a giraffe at the windbreak line, browsing attempts. It's hanging close to the compound boundary." "Static," then Ranger Salim replied. "Copy. Any damage?" Salim asked. "Not yet," Kito said. "But it's reaching hard. Might start leaning on trunks." "Understood," Salim said. "We'll send a patrol to haze it away if it stays." Kito watched the giraffe for another 10 minutes. The animal didn't act aggressive. It wasn't charging fences or pushing inward. It was simply fixated on the windbreak canopy, the only concentrated green in sight. That fixation mattered. Fixated animals did creative things. By 7:30, a patrol vehicle rolled along the compound track below the tower. Salim and another ranger, Amina, climbed out with calm, practiced movements. They didn't run. They didn't wave arms wildly. They approached at an angle, keeping distance, making themselves visible without cornering. The giraffe noticed them immediately, ears rotating, head turning slightly. It watched them with that quiet, high-eyed calm. Giraffes had, as if deciding whether humans were a real problem or just another moving object. Salim raised one arm and clapped twice. Sharp sound, not too loud. Amina shook a small tin filled with pebbles, a noise tool they used to encourage animals to move without escalating. The giraffe took 2 slow steps backward. Then it stopped. It looked up at the windbreak canopy again, and instead of leaving, it stepped forward, back to the trees, like it had decided the reward was worth the annoyance. Kito's stomach tightened. The giraffe wasn't scared. It was committed. Salim clapped again, louder. Amina moved closer, still at a safe angle, and raised her voice. "Hey, move on," she called. The giraffe finally turned away from the trees and walked 10 paces out into the open. Kito exhaled, relieved. Then the giraffe pivoted and returned along the windbreak line, simply choosing a different spot where the canopy dipped slightly lower. It wasn't leaving the windbreak. It was shopping the line. Kito watched the animal browse what it could, then step, browse again, testing for weak points in the pruning pattern, places where a branch drooped, where a tree grew faster, where leaves were reachable. The leaves stayed high overall, but not everywhere. A windbreak was only as uniform as the tree's growth. Salim looked up toward the tower and made a small frustrated gesture, as if asking, "You seeing this?" Kito keyed his radio again. "It's moving along the line," he reported. "Not exiting, looking for lower canopy sections." Salim replied, "Copy. We'll keep pressure, but we can't chase it into the road zone." That was the constraint. The compound boundary sat near a service road. Hazing an animal too hard could push it into traffic or deeper into restricted research areas. They had to balance discouragement with safety. Kito thought fast. Windbreak management wasn't just about fences and pruning. It was also about offering animals a better alternative. He climbed down from the tower and jogged to the vegetation shed where they stored browse bundles for enrichment near the far waterhole. Branches cut from fast-growing shrubs, used to lure animals away from sensitive zones during certain operations. He found Salim by the vehicle and waved him over. "If we hang browse bundles farther out," Kito said, "we might pull it off the windbreak without driving it hard." Salim's eyes narrowed, considering. "You mean give it a better option," he said. "Exactly," Kito replied. "Not at the compound. Out by the open flats. Make leaving feel like winning." Amina nodded. "We can do that," she said. "We've used browse piles for elephants." They moved quickly. Kito grabbed 2 bundles of leafy branches and loaded them into the patrol vehicle. Salim drove them out along the track to a point well away from the windbreak, open ground near a stand of natural thorn trees where giraffes already browsed occasionally. They placed the bundles on the ground and backed away, then returned toward the compound edge. From the tower area, Kito could see the giraffe still working the windbreak line, neck extended, tongue flicking, choosing the easiest reachable leaves. Salim and Amina approached again, clapping and making noise. But this time, they didn't just push it away. They guided it. They angled their approach so the giraffe's easiest escape direction was toward the browse bundles and natural trees, not along the windbreak and not toward the road. The giraffe stepped away, then paused, head turning, eyes scanning. It caught the scent of the browse bundles or saw the darker green patch ahead. Something changed in its posture. Its head lifted, ears forward, attention shifting. It took a few slow steps toward the open flats. Then, with that quiet giraffe confidence, it walked away from the windbreak line and toward the offered green. Kito felt a wave of relief, not because the giraffe had been bad, but because the windbreak had survived another morning without a large animal deciding to solve the canopy problem by pushing or breaking. From the tower, the windbreak looked intact, leaves still high, trunks unbent. And out on the flats, the giraffe lowered its head to the browse bundle and began eating easily, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally stop teasing it with unreachable leaves. Keto watched it chew and thought about how close the situation had been to becoming a daily routine. If the giraffe had learned the windbreak line as a reliable stop, it would return again and again, testing more aggressively, leaning harder, damaging trees that took years to grow. Today, the leaves stayed high because the humans hadn't tried to win with force. They'd redirected with a better answer: food where it belonged. And the giraffe, smart in its own way, had accepted the easier option, leaving the windbreak to do its quiet job, holding back dust, staying green, and reminding everyone that in dry country, the real power was always in the leaves. The next morning, Keto arrived at the tower earlier than usual, before the compound generator fully warmed, before the first kettle boiled, before anyone could tell him he was being overly cautious. He wasn't being overly cautious. He was watching for habit. Animals that discovered a good resource rarely treated it like a one-time event. They treated it like a new line on their map. The sun was just lifting over the plains when Keto climbed the tower ladder and settled behind his binoculars. The windbreak line lay quiet, trees dark against brightening sky. Dust hung low in the distance like a veil. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then a long shape moved near the far end of the windbreak, neck first, then shoulders, then the slow unfolding of a whole giraffe stepping out of pale grass. Same male, same dark patches, same deliberate walk. Keto's stomach tightened, but he didn't feel panic. He felt confirmation. It remembered. The giraffe approached the windbreak line again, but not with the same immediate fixation. It walked parallel to the trunks for a few meters, pausing now and then to look up. It was checking canopy height like someone checking a shelf, evaluating. The leaves stayed high. But the giraffe had also learned something yesterday. There was easier food elsewhere. Keto watched closely to see which lesson would win. Below, Salim and Amina were already on patrol. They had changed their schedule too, because a single day's success didn't mean a pattern was broken. They drove the vehicle slowly along the compound track, then stopped short of the windbreak, staying out of the giraffe's comfort bubble. Amina looked up at the tower and gave Keto a small thumbs up. "We're here." Keto radioed down. "Same individual is back," he said. "He's walking the line, not pushing yet." Salim replied, "Copy. We'll wait for his choice. No pressure unless he commits." That restraint mattered. Pushing too early could turn a curious check into a stubborn contest. Animals sometimes dug in when they felt challenged, especially if they thought the resource was worth defending. The giraffe stepped closer to a section where the canopy dipped slightly. It lifted its head, tongue flicking once, testing reach. It got a few leaves, just enough to taste success. Then it tried for more and had to stretch awkwardly, front legs stiff, neck angled, jaw working at the very edge of comfort. Keto could see the effort in the movement, the small shifting of hooves, the way the giraffe repositioned to find a better angle. That was the danger zone, when effort started looking like it might be worth escalating. Salim and Amina approached, calm and angled, clapping softly, more reminder than threat. The giraffe paused and looked at them. It didn't retreat far this time. It held its ground for a moment, ears rotating. Keto held his breath. He didn't want this to become a daily standoff. Then, from the open flats beyond the windbreak, a small group of impala moved through the grass. Their presence wasn't directly related, but it changed the scene slightly. Movement, sound, a sense that the wider plains were active. Wildlife cues mattered. Animals read the environment constantly. The giraffe's head turned toward the flats, then back to the canopy. And then it did something that made Keto's eyebrows rise. It walked away from the windbreak without being pushed, Not fast, not startled, just done. It moved in a straight line toward the spot where Quito and the Rangers had placed browse bundles yesterday. Except the bundles weren't there anymore. They'd been a one-time lure, not a daily feeding station. They'd eaten that day's branches and cleared the area to avoid creating dependence. The giraffe reached the exact spot anyway and stopped. Quito watched it lower its head, sniff the ground, and lift it again, confused, mildly annoyed. It took a few steps in a slow circle, checking. No bundles, no easy green. Quito's chest tightened. Here was the new risk. The giraffe had learned food appears here, and when it didn't, it might decide the windbreak was still the better bet. Salim seemed to realize it too. He radioed Quito. "We don't want him associating the flats with guaranteed handouts," Salim said. "But we also don't want him returning to the windbreak." Quito thought fast. They needed a middle path, redirect without creating a feeding schedule. He climbed down and met them at the vehicle. "We can move the enrichment point," he said. "Not the same spot, different location each time, and only when we need to shift him." Amina nodded immediately. "Like rotating," she said. "So he doesn't camp one place." Salim looked out at the giraffe, still circling the empty patch. "We can do one small bundle today," he said. "Farther out. Then next time, none." Quito agreed. The goal wasn't to feed. It was to break the association with the windbreak. They drove to the vegetation shed, grabbed a smaller bundle, half of yesterday's, and this time placed it near a natural thorn grove farther away, where giraffes already browsed naturally. They tucked it among existing shrubs, so it looked less like a human handout and more like a natural find. Then they backed off. The giraffe lifted its head, noticed movement in the distance, and slowly walked toward the thorn grove. When it reached the bundle, it began eating immediately, relaxed, tail flicking. Quito felt relief, but it was cautious relief. Because now they were managing two lessons at once. Windbreak leaves are high and annoying. Sometimes there is easier food elsewhere, but it's not guaranteed. That second lesson was the tricky one. They wanted the giraffe to choose natural browse, not wait for humans to deliver. Over the next 3 days, Quito and the Rangers ran a careful pattern. Day 1, small bundle near Thorn Grove, only to redirect. Day 2, no bundle, only quiet hazing if the giraffe returned to the windbreak. Day 3, no bundle again, but a patrol presence that guided the giraffe's path away from the compound boundary and toward natural browsing areas. Each morning, the giraffe appeared, sometimes at the windbreak, sometimes near the flats, checking, testing, learning. And each morning, the windbreak held. Not because the giraffe stopped wanting leaves, but because the system around the windbreak stopped being predictable. The giraffe couldn't solve the windbreak by persistence, because it never got enough payoff. It also couldn't solve the flats by waiting for bundles, because bundles weren't consistent. So the giraffe did what smart animals did when human systems stopped being easy. It returned to what worked without drama: natural trees, wider plains, normal browsing routes. On the 4th morning, Quito watched from the tower as the giraffe walked toward the windbreak, paused at the edge, lifted its head, and then, almost dismissively, turned away before it even tried to reach. It didn't waste time on high leaves anymore. It had learned the windbreak line wasn't a reliable meal. Quito exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time in days. The leaves stayed high because the humans protected the windbreak without turning it into a battle or turning the flats into a cafeteria. And the giraffe reached the windbreak line again and again until it understood the simplest truth of all: some green is worth the effort, some green isn't.